Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Got a lot coming your way on this episode. It is our second show of this week. In case you missed episode 1 this week, we went over an hour with Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting expert. Not only did we take a look at 5 potential flip candidates that Penn State could still add to their 2025 recruiting class, guys who are currently in other recruiting classes that Penn State hasn't given up efforts with. That was a fun conversation. But before that, we tapped into Tyler's knowledge of covering this freshman class for the last couple of years during their recruiting processes. And we had a really extensive progress report on both sides of the ball regarding a bunch of first-year Nittany Lions. So if you skipped that episode for whatever reason, I'd encourage you to check that out. If you really want to follow the narrative through this Penn State preseason camp and stay updated on what we're hearing and what we're seeing, go check out that episode. On this particular episode, later on, you're going to hear from one of the team leaders in senior safety, Jaylen Reed. He and I recently sat down for a one-on-one discussion. You probably heard our one-on-one discussion on this podcast with Devon J. Thomas, defensive tackle, a couple of weeks ago. This time around, you'll hear from Jaylen Reed in his second year as a starting safety. But we begin with the latest from Penn State preseason camp. And to do that, bring on board Daniel Gallen from Lions247.com. Daniel, how's it going today?
It's going good, Tyler. It's 16 days now, and every time I open the site, I see your latest installment of the countdown, and it's really sinking in how close we are to being in Morgantown in a couple weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks from tomorrow, Friday, this Penn State squad will make its way south and get ready to play West Virginia on that Saturday afternoon. Daniel, Mark Brennan will be there providing live coverage. That's when we'll get underway with our post-game podcast. And you know the drill by now if you've been listening to the show for a while, but we are still in let's learn about these Nittany Lions mode. And that's because it's still mid-August. And while we think we know a lot of the primary pieces that will be out there come kickoff on August 31st, there are still risers we're hearing about, young players making a name for themselves in some key positional battles. And we're going to work our way through a bunch of topics. I want to be fully transparent here to our listeners and our viewers. We have not seen Penn State football practice since we last had kind of a preseason catch up. That was last Friday episode. We haven't been out there since Thursday evening. We do anticipate being on the practice field this upcoming Tuesday, August 20th, for another look at the Nittany Lions. But that's a significant stretch during preseason camp. We'll acknowledge that. Anytime that Penn State says, hey, come on in, our doors are open, media is welcome, you know that we will be live on location and we will be well represented at Lions 24/7. But we can only cover what's available to us. So I do want to present that. On top of that, though, we do have conversations with people in the facility on a regular basis. And more recently, we heard from James Franklin. We heard from offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. We heard from a few veteran players, including both the top 2 quarterbacks on this team, Andrew Allar and Beau Pribula. And Daniel, so we have a lot of different ways we're going to navigate this show and guys we're going to touch on. But I think we should probably begin on the fact that the physicality of this camp is something that's been talked about a bit. Not really unique to hear that a camp is physical on the football field as the team's getting ready, but just from coaches on down through the players, sounds like there's maybe a heightened component to that in 2024. They had a scrimmage last Saturday, a controlled scrimmage, so that they're putting these guys in certain scenarios and situations, and 4-minute drills and 2-minute drills and goal line situations. So not a full-on regular football scrimmage, but our understanding is the defense had the edge that afternoon on Saturday. This is a team that will scrimmage in Beaver Stadium soon, and I know James Franklin every year says that's a huge step to get over into the stadium and to get these guys doing some full contact work. He says it starts to see the cream of the crop show up in those kind of situations on an annual basis. And Daniel, as we talk about that physicality, we're also learning about bumps and bruises. And unfortunately, we're going to go a while with seeing one of those freshman receivers.
Yeah, James Franklin told us that Peter Gonzalez, the freshman wide receiver from Pittsburgh, who we saw go through the process of earning an offer last summer and what that meant to him and how he went about it. He has a long-term injury, so he's going to miss some time. James Franklin hasn't really ruled anyone out for the season yet. He's definitely left that door open a little bit for guys to come back, like we've heard with Keon Wiley and Zariah Fisher. But Beau Pribula was asked about Peter Gonzalez and losing him, and he said that through the first early part of camp that Gonzalez had been really impressive. That he's a big body, he's someone you can throw the ball up to. He's physical. Didn't have blazing speed, but had good play speed and could get open and hold his own. So for Peter Gonzalez, this is tough. He had the pretty major injury earlier in his high school career, which necessitated that process that we saw play out last summer in terms of how he earned his offer, and now he's going to miss another long chunk of time. But he's someone with NFL high level football bloodlines. I think that he's mentally built for this kind of thing and knows what he's in for. But it is unfortunate to have a young player with some promise who Penn State potentially could have used this year at a position of need kind of have to now watch for a while.
We learned this Tuesday night and speaking with James Franklin about the long-term nature of this injury for Peter Gonzalez. We do not know the specific nature of the injury for him, but we're just I think 5 or 6 days at that point removed from hearing from James Franklin that he's been steady Eddie among those freshman receivers. A lot of good things about Tyser Denmark, Josiah Brown working his way back from his own injury, but Peter Gonzalez has been the guy, and we kind of paired him up with Anthony Specca in this conversation with Tyler Calvaruso on Tuesday during our freshman progress report, is that mentally and physically, those guys from Pittsburgh Central Catholic really came to campus in May ready to roll in a lot of different ways. And Peter Gonzalez was credited in that regard by James Franklin as recently as 5 or 6 days ago. So this is a step backwards, unfortunately for him. 2 out of 3 years where you've got a significant injury. It was a serious knee injury for him early in 2022. He ended up costing him a portion of that junior year, ended up really impacting who he could be that junior year. I know by the end of the season, he felt like he was back to who he was, but it took until that senior campaign, I think, when we really saw him, be a breakout kind of prospect. 47 catches, 1,081 yards, 12 touchdowns last fall. He left Central Catholic as that program's all-time receiving leader with 2,200 plus yards. And, I think that the good thing is he can lean on what he's already been through. And he's seen himself pick himself back up off the field after an injury and put in the arduous effort that is required, trust the medical professionals, and get to a point where you're back to where you want to be and even beyond it. The hard part is you probably felt like Peter Gonzalez day by day as he was here on campus was putting that chapter of his career in the rearview mirror. And so you could understand why this week could be really tough. This week might not be the week to say, Peter, get back out there and go chomp at the bit and go chase your return. This week might need to be the week where you spend a little time feeling sorry for yourself. You get people, the bright people in your ear talking you up a little bit. And so we wish Peter Gonzalez well. He's a guy who's been on this podcast, stand-up kind of kid, and really doesn't come across as a kid. I think that's really been the scouting report on him for a while, as he has a real mature professional makeup to him. But we're not going to get a chance to see him at Penn State this particular year for the next little while at least, and really the long while it sounds like. So focus now on Tyser Denmark, Josiah Brown among those freshmen. And remember, last year, you only brought in one freshman, Carmelo Taylor. He's not with the program anymore. So among the 4 players you've signed out of high school the last 2 recruiting cycles, right now you're only working with 2 of them on the practice field. Not ideal, but nothing Peter Gonzalez can do about that. And we hope we're seeing him in action again pretty soon. And unfortunately, it's the time of year where we have other injury, updates to pass along. And James Franklin was the bearer of bad news when it came to that on Tuesday evening, Daniel, because he mentioned, and these are more short-term things, we'll categorize them as bumps and bruises, but Khalil Dinkins, who's trying to claim that number 2 tight end job as a redshirt junior, and then both of those competitors for the running back 3 spot, Cam Wallace, a redshirt freshman, and true freshman Quentin Martin, according to James Franklin, they've been dealing with bumps and bruises, so it's been hard to get on read on what that competition looks like beyond Singleton and Allen. Your takeaways from those particular updates?
I think when you look at the tight end spot, it definitely opens the door for more reps to go around between the other tight ends in that room. Jerry Cross, Andrew Rapplier, Joey Schlaffer, Luke Reynolds. But I think Rapplier and Reynolds are the 2 to really watch, given the feedback that we've heard and also kind of our own expectations coming into the year for that position. Khalil Dinkins is someone who can do a lot of different things, and I think that when healthy, he'll definitely have a role in this offense, even if Rapplier and Reynolds really come along. But I think with those 2 guys, given their recruiting pedigree, where they are physically, I know we'll talk about Luke Reynolds a little bit later in the podcast, but I think that those 2 guys are in position to make contributions and maybe throw off the succession that Penn State has had a little bit, where it seems like it's really gone year by year in terms of guys that were one class behind, Brenton Strange stepping up, and then Dinkins was one class behind Warren and Johnson, him getting the chance to step up. It seems like Rapplier and Reynolds could really leapfrog their place in line. As for running back, we heard that from James Franklin that Quentin Martin was a little banged up in the spring, missed some time, and I think that was valuable for Cam Wallace to put his best foot forward. And we heard some good things about him and from him about how that went and what he was able to do in that competition for the number 3 job. I think given what we've heard from Andy Kotelnicki and these players, I think that it won't necessarily be as kind of clear cut behind Nick Singleton and Katron Allen as it was last year, where Trey Potts was pretty much just there for cameos and in certain situations. I think with the skill set that Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin both have, I think that we could see them on the field in maybe more unique situations, in more creative ways, even though we did see Trey Potts out there for some trick plays last year. But I think it's interesting behind them to have both of those guys missing time. Corey Smith is the other scholarship back in that room. He lost London Montgomery to the transfer portal. He's at East Carolina now. So that is something to watch. We've talked about it, that especially in 2022, Penn State has been really fortunate with the health of Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, especially given the depth concerns at various points over the past 2 years. So you want these guys to be healthy. You want them to be ready. So not only can they contribute in the offense, however Andy Kotelnicki wants them to, but so that you have that insurance, you have that depth behind your 2 stars at the top.
Yeah, Rappleyea and his potential gain from thinking setback is very difficult to ignore, considering what we've gathered about what he's looked like as a redshirt freshman. And then you mentioned Corey Smith there briefly. Some volume for him all of a sudden in the middle of preseason camp against some of the big boys on the squad, working with maybe some of the teammates that he won't get a chance to work with when the season comes and he's relegated to more of a scout team role as we expect. And heard a great line from J1 Sider back in June about Corey Smith. He was one of the summer enrollees. Quentin Martin, of course, was a January enrollee, competed in spring practices and winter workouts. He said, quote, "I said, listen, you ain't competing for a job right now. You've got to learn what the job is." So I don't know where Corey Smith is in that process of learning what the job is, but he's been a guy we've kind of filed away. Momentarily, it would seem he's getting a little bit more work than maybe everybody bargained for, but such is the nature of the position at running back. And we know they're not going to wear Katron Allen and Nick Singleton down to the ground before they get to kickoff. So some updates there. We'll keep gathering intel as we can, and we'll get a chance to be on the practice field Tuesday. And again, watching some of practice. And so if guys are absent, we'll note that in our notebook. And if they're out there and competing, that'll be a good step forward for team health overall. As I mentioned at the top of the show, offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki joined us after practice on Tuesday. That was practice number 11, by the way, for them during preseason camp. Kotelnicki has been someone we've had a chance to hear from quite a bit lately. It feels like we had him in the press conference setting at Media Day earlier this month. In late June, we got him as part of a Media Day event over at Haluba Hall. And of course, he came out the gates with a great opening press conference last winter. But Daniel, he was asked about the state of the offense, and as was James Franklin. James Franklin actually took it in a really different direction that we'll get to in a moment. Kotelnicki kept things pretty much in check. He didn't really go too far on a limb, saying he's been pleased. He thinks it's evident that the offense is at a different point now than it started at camp and then when it started in the year. He said they're seeing that natural development. Guys are working through their mistakes and then correcting them. They're never going to be perfect, but he feels like it's a group overall that's been coachable and willing to grow. I think what we keep going back to, though, with Kotelnicki are a couple things: the explosive plays and then getting the ball in the hands of your playmakers. And starting with those explosive plays, he was asked a really good question, I thought, about the balancing act you've got to kind of conduct as an offensive coordinator when you're trying to have such a leap in explosive plays. And we know that's really necessary for the Nittany Lions to take the next step for college football playoff contention. But at the same time, this was an offense that was among the nation's best at ball security, not giving away possessions, not putting their defense in a bad spot on their own territory. And so Kotelnicki was asked about how do you ramp up the explosive plays without then ramping up the turnovers, because maybe you're putting the ball more at risk. And my biggest takeaway from his answer, Daniel, was that he said, you don't always have to be throwing it deep to get explosive plays. A lot of designed imaginations here, I think, that we've discussed on the show, that we heard about Andy Kotelnicki at Kansas, where the ball may be traveling from quarterback to target 5-6 yards, maybe 10 yards, but then you're getting 40-yard plays out of it. And we've identified slot players like a Caden Saunders, maybe a Tyser Denmark emerging, versatile weapons like Nick Singleton lining up in different spaces, maybe a Quentin Martin showing off those receiving skills. And when you're talking about the short area passing game leading to big plays down the field in the screen game, and this is something that just didn't surface last year, downfield, close to the line of scrimmage, what have you. But I came away being like, yeah, Koto Mickey made a really good point right there. And I think when people think of explosive plays, they want to see, here we go, chuck it deep, right? With Drew Allar just launching it to a receiver in stride 40 yards down the field. But let's remember that they brought in a guy who's considered a rising offensive mastermind, and his job's to play chess. And it sounds like he feels like he has the pieces where it doesn't require bombs.
When you talk about the ball not having to travel that far, when you think about the jet motion and some of the stuff that we've heard that could benefit some of these players, that ball's traveling half a yard forward from Drew Allar to the receiver. But both Drew Allar and Beau Pribula echoed that. Allar referred to them as hidden explosive plays. Pribula framed it as you have your downfield passes, but then you have your intermediate plays that turn into explosives. And then you have the plays where you're even more patient, which involves getting the ball to one of the running backs, and then they can break something off and go. I think Andy Kotelnicki put out his definition of what explosive plays are. I believe I saw it was 12 plus on the ground, 15 plus through the air. And Drew Allar said that you get the ball to Nick Singleton or Katron Allen 5 yards down the field where they're one-on-one with a Mike linebacker. That's a 12-yard gain there, given how those guys play. So I think that was good framing from Kotelnicki. I do think that if you want to win in college football and Penn State wants to advance into the highest level of the game, you are going to need to hit on some of those downfield passes. That's something that we've heard different things about, and some of the feedback we got on the wide receivers on Tuesday, I think is positive in that regard. But there are different ways to get this done. And I think with Andy Kotelnicki, he's going to figure out the best way to get it done with what he has in front of them. And it might not necessarily look like a bunch of deep bombs, but you might look at a box score after the game or hear Kotelnicki and Franklin's feedback and hear, yeah, we had X explosive plays, even if it didn't necessarily quite feel like that over the course of the game.
Yeah. And make no mistake, this offense needs to go vertical. It has the tools to go vertical. It's got one of the most impressive quarterback prospects that we've seen in the recent cycles, being the trigger man. And we're going to get into that. And that's a deep conversation these days with Drew Allar. And we'll talk about Beau Pribula momentarily, but just finishing up on the Kotelnicki conversation. And we have this well documented over at Lions247.com. In fact, we had it well documented a couple nights ago on Tuesday, directly coming off the practice field. So if you're not following our VIP coverage, I know you love the podcast and you get a nice hour of intel. You can get 24/7, pun intended, Penn State intel over at our site. 30% off VIP right now, taking you all the way through preseason camp, all the way through this season, and then all the way through next year, into next year's preseason camp if you're signing up for a year pass at this point. But getting back to Kotelnicki, he said, I'm just going to go to his quote because I think this gets the message across great, and I think it's going to be music to a lot of ears out there. He said, quote, "If we have an elite speed player, put him in position to utilize his elite speed. If we have a great change of direction or physical receiver, put him in a position to do that. If you have a tight end and he's better at blocking versus receiver, put those guys in those positions." I know it sounds cliche, like, duh, coach, I play Madden and the new college football video game, so I know how to do that. But actually getting these players to execute those things, and more importantly, as coaches, reflecting and really having the evidence and confidence in saying this is what that player does really well, that's everything. So, I mean, Kotelnicki is, again, he's hammering home a point that just felt like it was totally disconnected with the Penn State offense last year about playing to the strengths of your personnel to set yourself up on a weekly basis and a matchup basis, quarter by quarter adjusting, series by series adjusting and feeding it to who you need to feed it to. We've heard from some assistant coaches, but Andy Kotelnicki himself, he's going to be the guy who calls the plays here. I love the simplicity that he's seemingly applying to the process, and he's challenging guys. They want to make sure guys prove they are the players who will flourish in those kind of positions. It's not just about Amari Evans. Maybe 50% of the time he's going to get it done on a downfield pass. They want high potential guys who also have a relatively high floor. I think they don't want to take gambles in the middle of games. And so they're trying to get a good feel for that. It's also why Andy Kotelnicki said particularly the receivers are on a really, really fluid spot for what positions they'll play. I think they're really trying to see what are the strengths and weaknesses of these guys, putting them through this challenge right now. And then you've really got to cater to the strengths of your best players. And what do you think that might look like, in your opinion, Daniel, having our head kind of wrapped around the personnel here at Penn State, obviously wanting to peel back the curtain a bit more as this month goes on, but we're 2 weeks away from kickoff. So what does that mean to you short term against West Virginia?
I think it means that we can just see, from a volume perspective, more players on the field, more players involved. You think about, like we were talking about the number 3 running back last year, and depending how games are going, we did not see much of Trey Potts here and there. You think about the past 2 years at wide receiver, where it was pretty much the 3 guys that started the game were the guys that Penn State rolled with, and you didn't see much deviation from that, aside from here and there. So I think that you'll see different packages, different players involved, players used in different situations. I think that's kind of where my mind is going right now at this point in camp, and with what we're hearing from Kotelnicki and from some of how the players are describing it. We'll see. It's one of those things where when you're in the heat of battle, the best laid plans can go awry. And I think that I'm really curious to see how Andy Kotelnicki counterpunches. I know that you've brought it up before, like what happens if Penn State goes 3 and out on those first 2 drives in Morgantown. Where's kind of the psyche of the offense? Where's the psyche of the fan base? All that stuff. Now, how does Andy Kotelnicki adjust to that? But I think that in terms of having a plan going into things, figuring out how to use all these different receivers, all these different playmakers that they have on offense, I am really intrigued and confident that Kotelnicki can work some stuff out. But from where we are right now, I think that for me, it just means seeing players on the field that maybe we haven't seen too much of, and guys on the field in specific situations in specific spots.
Kotelnicki is the mastermind of whatever this offense looks like. And we know that Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, probably the most accomplished members of this offense. Tyler Warren is a guy who could be maybe the top tight end prospect in the NFL draft next year. But let's face it, Daniel, the face of this offense, for all intents and purposes, nationally, is Drew Allar, second-year starting quarterback. He's now a junior. He's now 3 years removed from that remarkable rise up the recruiting rankings, which he finished as the number 1 quarterback in 24/7 Sports Assessment for that 2022 class. 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, very pretty stat line. Along the way, we've already covered it in detail. We did post-game podcast after those matchups. We know what the warts looked like on his first season as a starting quarterback. You went right up to him after practice, along with a few other reporters, because he was available to us on Tuesday night, and got a chance to pick his brain a little bit. Before I toss to you, I'll just say, and asking and hearing from Andy Kotelnicki on Drew, it wasn't about arm strength. It wasn't about those maybe heightened rushing abilities that we've heard a little bit about from team facilities. It was him saying that it's been a really strong dialogue between Drew Allar, Danny O'Brien, the quarterback's coach, Andy Kotelnicki, and James Franklin, the head coach, who sits in on a bunch of those quarterback meetings. He noted the curiosity that Drew Allar has for the sport, and says that he has a sense of being a coach on the field. Now, can he be a commander on the field when they get out there and play West Virginia? I think that's the question that a lot of people are wondering for number 15. What were your top takeaways from your time spent with Allar?
I think the one thing that really stood out to me, and I think stands out when you look at how last year went and some of those big spots, was Aller talked about him and the offense learning how to bounce back quicker against the defense. He said that was something that, as a first year starter in college football last year, that maybe he didn't do the best job of. He did say that he let himself dwell on things a little bit. And we saw in some of those big games last year, it really did feel like things snowballed a little bit. Ohio State and Michigan are really stand out. And so I think that Aller is working on navigating when things don't go right in practice. And that was his very last question of his availability. Someone asked him, how do you manage when this defense, which we've heard a lot of really good things about, and I think we all have high expectations for, how do you manage when this defense gets the better of you? And that's where Allar took his answer. He said that sometimes the defensive line can make things a living hell. That was his direct quote, for the offensive line and for the quarterbacks. We know how much talent they have in the trenches on that side of the ball. And so he said that he's working through bouncing back quicker, flushing things and moving on, and that the entire offense is trying to take that same mentality. Everything is going to flow from Drew Allar. I think that if he is dwelling on something, that affects everyone. That affects the offensive line, the wide receivers, the running backs, tight ends, everyone. If they see him move on quickly, I think you refer to it as washing, moving on and going to that next play, I think that everyone else will come along with him. So I think that that's something that is going to be interesting to monitor. It's going to be something that will be tough to measure, other than hearing directly from them. But going back to what we talked about earlier, West Virginia could present some challenges. It'll be a hostile environment. So we could see some of this pretty early from Drew Allar. But that was the number one thing that stood out to me. He bundled that in with being consistent every day, not letting the defense get the better of them, or if they're having a good day, uh, stacking it, coming out the next day and building off of it instead of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that sort of thing.
I'm curious on this, Daniel. We've heard a lot of, read between the lines and some just outright statements that have really, for us, juxtaposed maybe what the offensive room, what the quarterback room was last year with Mike Yurcich as the guy kind of setting the temperature versus what it might be like now with Andy Kotelnicki at the helm. Did you have any takeaways in regard from what you heard from Drew?
It is interesting that you talk about Mike Yurcich setting the temperature, because Drew Allar did the classic thermostat, not the thermometer line. That's how he's approaching things this year. That the quarterbacks want to be the thermostat. They want to be the ones setting the temperature for the rest of the team. They don't just want to be gauging things or reacting to what's happening. And I think that some of that comes from Andy Kotelnicki. I think that given how we've heard Kotelnicki describe himself and how he goes about things, it's clear that he's a much different person than Mike Yurcich was.
Vastly different.
And I think that that is something that can trickle down to your room, in terms of how they handle things. Because when you're a coach, your players reflect who you are. We talk about it all the time, where if a coach seems tight, then a team comes out tight. If a team takes on the personality of their coach. And so, hearing Allar talk there, I think he's always been a very, confident, well-spoken person. But he seemed a little bit more relaxed with his confidence. He was making sure to go out of his way to shout out different players. His answers were really thorough. I thought he was really honest with us. He was really insightful. And so I think that some of that has to do with having Andy Kotelnicki there and Allar kind of reflecting the coaching that he is getting.
Well, where Drew first underwent his informal media training, right?
Lions 24/7 podcast.
That's right. He had three spots with us before he came to campus. He got significantly better each time. I think a lot of people remember his first time on this podcast when he was finishing up his junior year. We were asking him a lot of questions, and he's a natural with it now. Beau Pribula is another guy who joined us a bunch before he got to campus on this podcast. He's also someone that would love to step up and claim his piece of this Penn State offense. He's a redshirt sophomore at this point. Of course, he took the red shirt as a freshman when Drew Allar was serving as Sean Clifford's primary backup. And maybe kind of under the radar last year, he accounted for 9 touchdowns without a turnover when he did get involved. Of course, he only threw for about 105 yards along the way on 10 completions. We just don't really know what that looks like quite yet, especially in a game format. So you spoke with, I know you had a chance to go through that today, finally, and from Beau Pribula's conversations on Tuesday. And so I'm curious what you made of that. I haven't had a chance to really review your notes myself yet. I think you did it maybe within an hour or so of us sitting down to record the podcast. I know he's motivated. I know that Andy Kotelnicki thinks that he is truly one of the special weapons they have on offense, and he says that he plans to use the special weapons on offense. I don't know what it looks like beyond quarterback for him. Maybe it's strictly quarterback this year, but what is he saying that kind of piques your interest at this point?
Pribula seemed really, really confident, really, really sure of himself in describing how he's going to fit in Andy Kotelnicki's offense and what Kotelnicki's offense is going to do for him. He said that he's having his best camp. He said part of it is that he's in year 3. He should be having his best camp. He knows what college football is, and he knows what he's in for. But he said that he feels explosive. He feels comfortable in the offense. And he kind of extrapolated that out from the passing perspective. He said that this is the best that he's seeing the field. He's really comfortable in the pocket, which I think is something that a lot of people are interested in. I think it's something that we're interested in because, like you said, we haven't really seen him as a thrower or need to be a thrower in what we saw from him last year. So I think that hearing that he's comfortable in the pocket, he said that if he wants to tuck and run, it's waiting until the last minute to do that, to get out. And so I think that it sounds like he's just taking on a more of a complete quarterback and having a more holistic approach to the position. How he's used, I think, is going to be a big storyline. We heard so much about that Pribula package last year and didn't see it in the biggest spots and didn't really see it overall. And Andy
Yeah, I think we
Kotelnicki,
really got to see it about 2 weeks after Mike Yurcich was fired. By the time we really saw it, Michigan State started getting some real run with it. But yeah, you're right. That was more of a tease than anything that was tangible.
definitely. And so we know Kotelnicki has had success and has experience with Jason Bean and Jalen Daniels using multiple quarterbacks at once or over the course of a game. So we'll see what that actually looks like. But I came away from listening to Pribula talk, just kind of taken with that confidence and really impressed with how he's approaching things. He seems very sure of himself, sure of where he stands on this team and in the quarterback room. Really complimentary of the offensive line, really complimentary of Ethan Grunkemeyer. It was just kind of, it was nice to hear from him and kind of see where he's at right now.
And Beau's a guy that if he chooses to, he could stay in the game till he's 90 years old being a coach. I mean, he's come across that way since he was about 15, 16 years old. I know that's even more so now that he's been inside a program like that. He's been a real strong asset for this quarterback room. And again, really has done what he could with a lot of opportunities. And when you're checking in and you're up by 25, you're not really going to get a chance to showcase what you can do downfield in the passing game. So we'll see. It was a little bit of a scrambled situation late in the season when he was involved. Now you got a whole offseason to game plan how he fits in. At the receiver spot, Daniel, we'll work our way through a few more storylines here on the podcast before we get to Jaylen Reed, the senior safety, for a one-on-one conversation. But Harrison Wallace and Liam Clifford were both directly brought up by James Franklin. And he went there when he was asked about the state of the offense. He said he felt like the biggest thing in answering that question is that Liam Clifford and Harrison Wallace have stepped up at the receiver spot. They've been consistent. And when James Franklin is talking like that, I think that means we're going to see a lot of both of them. That's not surprising with Harrison Wallace at this point. He is viewed as this team's number one receiver by seemingly most people. And he was viewed by many people that way last year. An injury kind of derailed that. And then Keandre Lambert-Smith was the wide receiver one for much of the season. But right now, I think that Liam Clifford, he was the first guy listed back in late July when I wrote about 6 under the radar Penn State players, because everyone's been telling us he's going to play a bunch. And I just don't think people have really believed it for whatever reason. But, Sean Clifford's younger brother, now a redshirt junior, you can see him in the slot. You're going to see him outside. You're going to see him as a blocker. And you're going to see him quite a bit, at least at the start of the season. He's going to get the chance to earn a long leash, I think. And so with those two names, Daniel, we're not hearing about Julian Fleming a bunch. There's not a ton of buzz about him at the moment. We're hearing that he's exhibiting that possession receiver traits, a guy who's going to be really valuable in contested catches. I think you're talking about a chain mover. Again, I'm really thinking Mitch Tinsley in that regard. Then there's other pieces that are out there. But what do you make of James Franklin really putting it out there firmly that these two receivers have separated themselves? And by the way, speaking with Cam Miller, cornerback, about those particular receiver room, he brought those two guys as well without hearing what James Franklin said. He said those two guys are the ones who are bringing the most competition to the defensive backs on a daily basis.
We know that there is a lot of interest in Julian Fleming, so I will add that Beau Pribula lumped Fleming in with Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford as players who are raising the bar in that wide receiver room. I think that in terms of the feedback that we've gotten and maybe reading between the lines a little bit, Fleming has raised the bar in terms of preparation, approach, those sorts of things. And then I think Harrison Wallace and Liam Clifford have really showed up on the practice field. Beau Pribula said that they've, quote, 100% stepped up. And the way that Drew Allar was describing the areas where they've improved, I think is things that Penn State fans are going to be really, really interested in. There's a focus on these wide receivers being more physical. Allar said that they have a fast start period at the beginning of practice that really sets the tone for the day. And I think Allar said it might have been Monday. I don't know if it was Tuesday's practice. It was red zone one-on-ones with the wide receivers and the defensive backs. And Allar said the wide receivers just came out ready to go and had a really, really strong showing against this defensive backfield. And we know kind of what is in that defensive backfield. And so Allar said that there's a focus on being very physical, making those contested catches. Pribula says that it changes things for you as a quarterback when you throw it to a guy and you can be confident that he's going to bring down the contested catch, that he's going to grab that 50-50 ball. Allar said that he'd been throwing the ball to Trey Wallace in tight windows, and Wallace made a play where he had KJ Winston, I think, draped all over him. And Allar was able to fit the ball in, and Wallace was able to haul it in for a difficult catch. I think that these are the things that are going to help this offense move forward and this wide receiver group raise itself a little bit. Pribula also said, I think one of the magic words, he said that they're getting separation. I know that was something last year, especially down the stretch, that really came up when talking about the wide receivers. So it was a very all around good feedback. I think that Harrison Wallace and Liam Clifford are really the names right now. Those are the ones that are getting brought up. Allar and Pribula have talked about other guys improving. I think Pribula mentioned Omari Evans, Tyler Johnson, Anthony Ivy. Those are also some of his classmates from 2022. Allar was complimentary to Fleming, Caden Saunders, and I think Omari as well. So they're seeing things from this wide receiver group that as quarterbacks is making them more confident. Again, when the lights come on in Morgantown, we'll see, and then we can really judge. But I think that these particular points that are being brought up are really interesting, and I think are pretty good reasons for optimism when you think about this group.
And we know there has been hesitation from this coaching staff and from the players, I think, on down to talk too much about this receiver group because they know the deal. It's like a couple of years ago with the offensive line. No one would talk to you about the offensive line. It was like, just go watch them. No one would talk to you about them until like late October that year. So we'll see. It is good to hear some of these things, and hopefully we'll see a bit more on the practice field as well. And just quickly noting with that receiver group, last time we saw them in a game, none of them, not a single receiver had a catch until the fourth quarter. But last time we saw them play West Virginia, they had 300 plus combined yards in that room alone. And the guy who was the leading receptions that night, 7 of them, Harrison Wallace, has been really pointed to as the alpha among this current receiver core that is now 2 weeks away from facing West Virginia again. Daniel, give us a quick update on Luke Reynolds. People can take a deeper dive for sure over at Lions247.com. I know you've got a good story up on Wednesday this week about what the former 5-star tight end has been able to accomplish so far on campus. But tell our listeners some of the top points, the headline things that we have heard about Luke Reynolds lately.
I think the biggest headline thing that we've heard about Reynolds came from James Franklin on Tuesday night, where Franklin said that he's going to play. Franklin also said that he's going to be a good player at Penn State, which, given that track record at tight end, I think is pretty high praise. But Franklin said that Reynolds is going to play. It's to be determined whether it's 4 games and then he comes back for the postseason, or if he's a green light from the jump and we see him burn that red shirt. Franklin said that they haven't really made any of those decisions yet. But the one thing with Reynolds that came up in June when I talked to Ty Howell at a media availability was just that physical transformation for Luke Reynolds. He's listed at 241 on the roster right now. I think 24/7 Sports had him at like in the 220s. And then when he got to campus, Howell said that he was 214 or 216. So that's a lot of weight. And the players, I think, have really taken notice. Drew Allar said Now, I don't know how much he's put on, but it has to be, 20 pounds of muscle. I think Andrew Rapplier was like, yeah, he's up into near 245. He's done this. He's done the work. And with that, they're seeing him be more physical. I think Rapplier said that you're seeing him, put his nose in it a little bit more, that he's not afraid to get physical with defenders, which if you're going to play tight end at Penn State, you have to be able to do. Now, on top of that,
Franklin said the same thing after practice. He'll stick his face in it. He'll stick his face into the mess. And he's talked about it before. When you're transitioning from wide receiver like role in high school to where all of a sudden you're lining up across from Denied Dennis Sutton, life can suck for a while. But if you buy in, you can battle your way through it.
Definitely. And so it seems Reynolds is doing that. Allar said that he considers tight end to be the most difficult position to know on this roster, um, other than quarterback, because you have to be in the run game, you have to be in the pass game. He talked about the different tags that the offense has for the tight end position. So I came away over these past couple of weeks. I think that the quotes in that story, which you should read on Lions247.com, they date back to June and Ty Howell. We've got stuff from Media Day, talking to guys. We've got stuff from our past couple of availabilities, and it felt like a good time to put it all together, get a bit of a progress report on this 5-star, the number one tight end in the country per 24/7 Sports in that class, and kind of see how his teammates are feeling about him right now.
And again, going back to Dinkins, if this is an extended absence for him, or if it's just something that's been an issue in August, what's the trickle down effect on someone like Luke Reynolds? And Franklin said his weight has plateaued a little bit lately, and they're going to try to work on that. But yeah, when you jump from 215 to 240, 245 range, all of a sudden you are in some kind of contention to deal with Big Ten defenders as a freshman. And Daniel, we'll work our way over to the offensive line in a second. I might as well promote another story that we have up on Alonzo Ford, because we wrote a story about him on Monday. And I think I may have mentioned this on the Tuesday podcast, but Ford is somebody who transferred in 2023 after 25 starts through his first couple college seasons at Old Dominion. Your old friend, Ricky Ronnie, former offensive coordinator here, is the head coach down there, makes the move up here last May, gets on the field in August. And then by the end of that first week of preseason camp, he's done with a lower body injury. He's out there on a scooter. He's in a walking boot. Eventually, he's just an observer on the sidelines. And he didn't get to practice at all again until this August. And I'll tell you what, for James Franklin to say what he said about Alonzo Ford. Now, this was after we wrote an article, and I'd encourage you to check out the original article he wrote, because it's a lot of conversation with Ford himself for the first time since he got to campus about what his journeys looked like. He's gone from about 290 at Old Dominion to where he is now playing in the 320 range. And James Franklin said he has been a pleasant surprise. He used that, quote, pleasant surprise phrase 3 times in the same answer to describe what Alonzo Ford has been for them through the first 2.5 weeks of camp now to this point, Daniel. And he mentioned him really impressing and flashing in the run game. He said he thinks as his gets used to his new body, and as he gets works his way back from the injury absence, he's going to get more impressive as a pass rusher. But it sounds like he is a piece that they will be able to implement in maybe obvious rundowns, maybe when you're in a goal line situation, short yardage situations. And then building off that, James Franklin went so far as to say when he really gets all the way back, he's going to be in contention to be a starter here at Penn State. I didn't read that to mean August 31st or maybe even October 12th or whatever, but I think that means maybe later in the year he'll be a startable kind of player, not that he'll start. And then moving forward, he's a guy who carries eligibility for 2025 too. So this was a really, really encouraging update from James Franklin. So I just wanted to mention that, and then wanted to go over the offensive line, because what we got from James Franklin was, how many guys do you plan to use by design week 1 against West Virginia? Not just because someone gets hurt or someone's playing bad, but like, what is the game plan number? He talked about 8 offensive linemen by design. He said you're probably going to have at least 3 offensive tackles. You're going to have at least 3 offensive guards. And he talked about multiple centers being in play. And so we know Cooper Cousins can fill center or guard. James Franklin confirmed this week that he is going to be someone who is playable at both those positions. That's another guy we discussed a bunch on the last episode. But you bring in some of the interesting competitions going on. We know that there's 2 tackles to really focus on the left side. Drew Shelton, Javen Williams. Been getting the sense that Drew Shelton has really made his case to take on that role, like we saw him finish last year when Olu Fashanu was done. And then we also have talked about Nolan Rucci and Anthony Donko on the right side. JB Nelson's been kind of this floating piece where he could be at tackle, he could be at guard, and then Venga Ioane and Sal Wormley and Nick Dawkins, and I'm pretty sure I've gotten the nine names already. So what did you make of James Franklin's comments? And it's something that I feel like you and I have discussed all offseason. Phil Trautwein won't hesitate to rotate guys, and if they feel it gives them the best chance to beat West Virginia, stay fresh, play to guys' strengths, they're going to do that over the course of 4 quarters on August 31st.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that shakes out. And I think that the one thing that's nice about offensive line and position battles is that it really takes care of itself on the field. I think that we saw that as Caden Wallace as an example of that last year, where when you get out on the field and you're the better player, you're going to stay out there at those offensive line spots. But it's interesting. I asked Drew Allar about it, and he said that the most important thing is that he doesn't notice it. And right now he feels like he doesn't notice when there's different moving parts coming in and out. I didn't get the chance to follow up with him about the idea of multiple centers playing in a game. That's the one thing that in how James Franklin was laying things out that stood out to me a little bit, because we haven't seen that over these past couple of years. That
again, by design, we're not saying if you're up 38-17 in the 4th quarter, put Cooper Cousins in at center. We're saying going into the game, this is your plan. And he talked about multiple centers, and you're right, that is different.
Yeah, in my years on the beat, it was the Mike Miranda show, then it was the Juice Scruggs show, and a little Miranda and Scruggs, I think, flipped near the end of that year. But then last year it was Hunter Norzat. And I think that in terms of how an offensive line functions, I think that that's what you want, is that you want someone that you plug into the middle and everything goes from there. Definitely kind of the connective tissue of that offensive line. So that really caught my attention. Didn't get the chance to ask Allar about that and how that would change things. But I do think that if we see a rotation at guard or a rotation at tackle, rotations at multiple guards, multiple tackle spots, wouldn't really surprise me against West Virginia. Beau Pribula said that the leadership within the offensive line room is probably the strongest at any position group on the team. I think that given you have Nick Dawkins in that room, makes sense. And Pribula said that he's mostly running with the second team, and he's really impressed with that group. And it feels like it's still performing at a really, really high level, which would make sense if you're talking about playing this many guys and having this many rotations. So I think that we are still interested to see how this offensive line plays, and it is still a little bit of a question mark when you think about replacing 2 tackles and replacing your center, that it's easy to look at the collection of talent that's there and feel really confident in it, which I think that there is some level of confidence that we have in them, but it's different when you get to Saturdays, when you're in the heat of it, what that actually looks like. So I think that the offensive line, you feel optimistic about it, but you still really got to see it, because things can really go sideways if it isn't there.
I think the biggest shift generally is just there is a benefit of the doubt that's in place with that room now, which was completely non-existent for several years. But Phil Trautwein has built one up, and the players in that room, they have the talent. It's just what will it look like? And you can have all the talent in the world, but if it's not cohesive, as you said, all of a sudden Drew Allar's getting smacked to the turf, and scary situations can happen. Let's finish here. We did get an update on the place kicker competition from James Franklin. I'll tell you what, every time we've seen these guys, and it's been a couple times in August, they've been really impressive. I mean, last time we were on the field, last Thursday, it was a week ago, I counted them for being a collective 11 of 11, and it was kind of sprinkling outside. The field was a little wet. They were being rushed through some of this stuff, the bonsai drills, as they call them, and I didn't see a single miss, and that included several from beyond 40. But James Franklin kind of said something that we heard from Coach Lustig, Justin Lustig, the first-year special teams coordinator in the late spring. It seems like Chase Meyer maybe still tracking behind the other two. He's the guy who came in from Tulsa last winter. He was a starter for Tulsa last season. Before that, he was actually a kickoff specialist at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a junior. everyone's doing well. I think everyone's kind of matching or exceeding their expectations. But right now, Sander Sahaydak and Ryan Barker have separated themselves just a bit, it sounds like, from Meyer in the data that they've collected through the first couple of weeks. And additionally, James Franklin noted that maybe more strength from a couple of those guys in Sahaydak and Barker and their ability to drive the football. And by the way, we have heard from Franklin before say that past experience will be a factor. Game experience will be a factor in who they maybe send out. Could be a really wild situation if Sander Sahaydak were to go out there again and maybe able to conquer his demons, right? I mean, he had the chance to be the starting place kicker for the entire season potentially last year. If he goes out and starts off good, instead he had 2 misses against West Virginia before halftime, and then they come back out with Alex Falcons as their place kicker, and he never gave that job up all the way through the Peach Bowl. So Sahaydak has a chance here to maybe atone for some of that, kind of reset himself here. He's a former #1 overall kicker recruit, but don't sleep on Ryan Barker, as we've been telling you all offseason, a guy who walked on, an in-state prospect, came to campus last year and has really done a nice job to turn heads. Daniel, anything to add along the way before we say goodbye and turn over to Jaylen Reed?
I think in terms of the place kickers, Franklin framed it as they have 3 guys they feel like they can win with. And then we saw a little bit of what these guys are going through. Penn State put up a video on social media of Ryan Barker attempting a field goal with Franklin right there, blowing a whistle, a bunch of guys crowded around him, a lot of noise in the background, and he hits it. That's what Penn State is doing to try to figure out what they have in these kickers. I think Franklin said going into the stadium is big for those guys too. So we'll see. It's really interesting to have a 3-man race at that spot at this point, but we've seen it in the past. Penn State can find roles for different guys, and we'll find out August 31st.
Daniel, good stuff as always. A bunch of your coverage to be found at Lions247.com. You and I and Mark and Grace Brennan will get back together on the Penn State practice field on Tuesday. And after that, we'll hear from James Franklin again. We'll get a chance to hear from coaches and players as well. And we'll get on a podcast again together next week. Thanks, man. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Tyler.
Good stuff from Daniel as always. We're going to shift gears now and talk to a current Penn State standout. We'll get into it with safety Jaylen Reed.
Jaylen, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
I'm curious, you were such a linchpin with that Penn State defense last year. A lot of people called it elite. Lost some starters. Your defensive coordinator, Manny Diaz, now the head coach at Duke. Why do you feel optimistic that you can match the standard or maybe even surpass the standard that you guys set last year?
The main reason I would say, I feel like we have a lot more depth than last year. I feel like last year we had an elite defense. It was elite players on the defense. We had guys like Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Kalen King. Guys like that have had a huge impact. But I feel like this year it's just a lot more depth and a lot more players that has been unseen. And I feel like we have a lot to prove. So I feel like if everybody just keep that chip on the shoulder, we probably can surpass last year and do better.
I do want to ask about some of those other pieces, but for you specifically, I believe you were honorable mention selection conference-wide last year. I think you tweeted something else about that on the day that those came out. Do you feel like you were maybe a little overlooked, maybe undervalued externally looking at that Penn State defense last year, and how much do you see this as an opportunity to be a bit of a breakout for you as a senior?
No, for sure. I definitely feel like I was overlooked, but that's how I always go about things. I'm appreciative of being honorable mention, but I feel like my level of play was definitely up there with some of them other guys that they chose. But I'm definitely always appreciative, but this year is another opportunity for me to prove myself again, especially on a higher level, especially with the college football playoff extending. So I feel like especially we do what we're supposed to do, and we get a chance to go to the college football playoffs, my talents will really show in them big moments and them big games, and everybody won't have nothing to say then.
We're used to seeing you back deep at the safety position, but we've heard a lot this offseason that in this new defensive formation with the Lion position, that fifth defensive back, you're going to be playing a lot at the second level, getting you in space, using that physicality. Why do you think thus far you've been such a strong fit for that new role in the defense?
I feel like basically my versatility, and then at that position, it has to be like usually in the past we had like a nickel back, like Daquan Hardy, but Coach Tom Allen likes to run that on first down, second down, and I went to Tom Allen, I told him I can do that so we can bring Zachy Wheatley on the field so it can add another playmaker, Even though I'm still going to be playing both safeties, like I'm probably going to start at the deep safety, but more towards the season I'm going to end up at the Lion position just so we can have all of our playmakers on the field so we can all eat together.
You mentioned Zachy Wheatley. You came in with him. He's now a redshirt junior, started his career at cornerback, and he's been kind of the buzzy name in the defensive
Yes.
backfield this offseason. What has he done to take that next step forward?
The main thing with Zach Key, I feel like the growth in Zach Key mentally has taken a huge step, on and off the field, and his leadership qualities, I feel like he's starting to understand that he's stepping into that role where it could be his breakout year, and it's that time for Zach Key, I feel like he's doing a great job this offseason preparing for that, and I feel like it's going to be a big year for him.
You started alongside KJ Winston last year when he's a sophomore. He's popping up on some of those early first-round mock projections. What makes him special, and what do you think we'll see from him taking the next step forward as a junior?
First off, with KJ, if you just look at KJ, he already gives off first round. If you just look at his height and his weight, he's about 6'3", 210. That's a project safety, and then just the great things that he do on and off the field. I feel like to me, being around him every day, his leadership qualities take him a long way, and it compares to him on the field. He's always a vocal leader on the field, even as a young player, and he plays with great work ethic, and he's always flying around to the ball. So I feel like he's a great player. He's going to do great things in his career, and I feel like this year definitely, in my eyes, would be his last year.
We have heard there's going to be an emphasis on getting you three safeties on the field together. Zaki, yourself, and KJ. What does that do for this defense?
Like I said earlier, I feel like it goes back to bringing the versatility and having the best 11 on the field at all times. When you have the best 11, especially with us adding the 4 teams now in the Big Ten with the West Coast Pac-12 style of play, they're going to try to bring their style of play into the Big Ten. I feel like they're going to try to throw the ball, and I feel like us adding another safety or another defensive back is going to help us in the long run, especially in the passing game. So I feel like us three in the back end, I feel like is going to do great things this year.
I want to ask about another defensive back, a guy who's not getting nearly as many headlines as the three of you. Colin Dinkins joined the program as a walk-on. He's a redshirt sophomore. I've heard that he's really making a case for himself at the line position as well. What has stood out about him, and how much does he need to be on folks' radar? Because I don't think many know about Colin. They know his older brother Khalil, the tight end, but maybe not Colin.
Colin, he has an interesting story. He came in as a walk-on. He was a walk-on, and now he has switched to safety, not just the line. He's a full-time safety. So in our defense, you have to learn all 3 safeties. Like me, KJ, and Zaki, we all know all 3. And I feel like Colin, he does a great job just learning and taking in everything from each one of us. He comes in after study extra, watch film extra. After practice, he's getting extra reps with us. Just asking us and being a sponge and just learning everything. And I feel like it translated everything this spring. He had a great spring. He showed a lot of flashes, and I feel like if he comes into this fall, he has the opportunity to play this year a lot.
Also in the secondary, you added 2 top transfer players, Jalen Kimber coming from Florida, A.J. Harris coming from Georgia. What was the impression they made during spring practices, and how much are they set to make a big impact in their first year?
I'll start with A.J. A.J. just the style of his play. He reminds me, and it probably remind y'all, he will remind y'all a lot of Kalen King. He flashes just like Kalen, real aggressive, real flashy type of player. He always got swag, confidence. He came in early. Like I said, he was really a sponge. He really tried to learn a lot, and people don't notice that he's really young, even though he's a transfer. He just played his freshman season. Guys like that come in and be a sponge, and he already got the talent. It adds great things to our defense. And a guy like Jaylen Kimber, he's older. He's been around 2 programs. He just brings a lot of leadership qualities and a lot of experience to the room. So I feel like that'll help us.
Earlier, you talked about the importance of getting your best 11 on the field together. Abdul Carter's been part of that best 11 for a couple of years. Now he's doing it at a different spot. His move from linebacker to edge rusher, how have you seen that maybe create new opportunities for this defense and for Abdul himself?
I feel like it helps us create more splash plays a lot. Abdul is a great player. He makes a lot of his plays off blitzing, and when he just being himself and freelancing to the ball, when he just playing free, and I feel like DN is going to be a great job for that because, all he has to do is just rush up field, and that's his best quality of his game, and I feel like he's going to have a huge impact there. He done it for 2 years, and all he has to do is put on another year, and it's going to be good for him.
You guys clearly love playing for Manny Diaz. It showed on the field. It showed in the way you talked about him. Now that you've kind of settled in with Tom Allen here for the last 7 months or so, what is your evaluation of the former Indiana head coach and what he has meant to this defensive unit?
I feel like they're different, and they're similar in their ways, but they're different at the same time. Coach Tom Allen, he's a little bit older. He does things in a little more old-fashioned and old-school way, but it has the same qualities as Coach Manny. They're still trying to get the same job done at the same time. I feel like Coach Tom Allen, the difference between him and Manny, Tom Allen really breaks down everything and helps you understand it and understand everything, like the ins and outs of the plays. And I feel like he does a great job of building a relationship with his players. So, the first thing he did when he got here, he set a meeting with everybody. Literally the whole defense, even the walk-ons, and I feel like things like that is a great thing that's going to help us because last year we already have the talent, we already have the players, it's going to do its thing because the players got to go out there and play, and I feel like just having a coach like that we can trust and build on the past that we had built here for the defense, I feel like it's going to be great.
Who was a Penn State defender or maybe defenders that I haven't brought up in this interview that you think need to be out there and are really primed for a big year?
I feel like a Davion Collins, he's a cornerback, this offseason he has done a great job. I feel like this spring he has done a great job. Me personally, I feel like he was probably the best corner out there. Best corner out there this spring that played and showed a lot of flashes, Even in his 40 time, he ran a 4.28. That's a great thing for him. He's very fast, very athletic, very sticky in coverage. I feel like he's going to have a big year for us, and I feel like his name needs to be brought up more.
Let's finish with this. What is the mission for those few weeks that you get in August on the field together before you actually take on an opponent?
The mission, really for the defense, just rebuilding the bond again with the new coach, and just rebuilding the defense and make sure the standard is still the same thing as last year.
Thank you, Jaylen.
For sure.
Thanks again to Jaylen Reed for giving us his time and his thoughts on this Penn State defense and his upcoming senior season. A guy that I think a lot of folks around the country are going to become more familiar with game by game here in 2024. Before him, of course, we had Daniel Gallen, my colleague at Lions247.com, breaking down the latest of what we're hearing from the Penn State practice field. We're back with multiple episodes next week. We're going to have fun. We're going to have Bud Elliott on, if you're familiar with his work within our 24/7 and CBS platform. He's a national analyst. He's one of the co-hosts of the Cover 3 show, which is a fantastic listen for anyone who appreciates college football. He's going to hop on board with us in our next episode and help us break down this new look Big Ten landscape. We're getting close to seeing these new conference competitors in action. He's going to share his thoughts on who he sees as the legitimate championship contenders, the legitimate playoff possibilities from this conference, and we'll pick his brain on a lot of things Penn State as well. Whatever we're hearing on the recruiting trail and from the Penn State practice field, we will bring your way in that next episode as well. For now, stepping aside on behalf of Daniel Gallen and everyone else over at Lions247.com, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.